Joining us now, great friend of the show with a big announcement, Matt Stoller. Great to see you.
Good to see you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So you are taking your Substack, you're making it paid now. Talk about the differences, why you decided to make this move, and what this is all about.
Yeah, well, so I've been writing big for about 2 years, and I focus on the politics of monopoly and finance. And so what I'm doing now when I take it paid is I'm doing online communities, and I'm going to be investing in a lot more exposing of monopolies and giving away opportunities to actually talk to policymakers or affect policy. One of the things about the anti-monopoly movement is that it is actually one of the most successful political movements that we've seen maybe in the last 40 or 50 years. So we have antitrust enforcers who are supported by both parties that want to break up large dominant firms. And one of the reasons is because people on both sides of the aisle are learning about the problem of concentrated power. I've been tracking this for about 2 years in my newsletter. Before that, I wrote a book on it, and going to continue, going to expand, going to invest in bringing more content, more effective content, and exposing the monopolies, because that's actually how antitrust enforcers at a state level, at a local level, at a federal level can act.
You know, let me just say, I think both of us are paid subscribers already. Yep. And if you care about actually good journalism and supporting it, it isn't free. You have to invest in it if you're able to. And so Matt has been doing incredible work. It's been extraordinarily influential. It's been extraordinarily impactful. I could not recommend his newsletter more. It touches on all of the things that we care about here on this show, concentrations of power, the way that this town actually works. And as you said, it's one of the sort of few hopeful bright spots where you do have some genuine interest and genuine thought happening on both sides of the aisle. So could not recommend to you more. Of course, we'll put the link down below that you check out Matt's Substack, because it's incredibly important to understanding what is actually happening here in Washington.
I couldn't agree more, Krystal. And Matt, you've had a profound impact on my own thinking in your book, Goliath, which I also recommend if anybody wants to go check that out. And let's give people a taste of kind of some of the work that you do. Let's put this up there on the screen from your newsletter, the latest one. Economists to cattle ranchers. Stop being so emotional about the monopolies devouring your family business. What do you mean by that, Matt? What's happening here?
Yeah, so there was this, what's been happening over the last 5 years is we all know about big tech, right? Like Amazon, Google, Facebook, Apple. In meatpacking, or the cattle and beef industry, it's the big four. Mm-hmm. So it's Cargill, it's Tyson's, it's National Beef, and they control 85% of the meatpacking. Now, if you look at the share of the retail dollar, so you pay about $6, $7 per pound of beef, that goes to the retailer, it goes to the packer, and it goes to the cattle rancher, the producer. In about 2015, about 35 cents went to the meat packer. Today, it's about $1.50. Whoa. And so what's happening? Wow. Yeah, no, it's about 15 to 20% of the price that you pay at the supermarket is a result of that meat packing consolidation. Now, the rancher, even though the price of beef is at a record high, the ranchers are actually going out of business because the packer is, driving the price to us up and driving the price to the cattle rancher down. Now, there's a lot of anger in Congress because the ranchers are politically powerful, and they are a right-leaning group, and they're now unified because they're desperate. Mm-hmm. So Chuck Grassley and John Tester proposed a bill to address problems in the market, and there was going to be a historic hearing. And then what happened, and this is the secret key to understanding power in America, is that a group of economists at Texas A&M and the USDA came out with a study that said, don't worry, everything is fine. There are no problems. This is all just supply and demand. And they came out with this study, and at this hearing, which happened last week or 2 weeks ago, the head of the committee, David Scott, said, well, now we know everything is fine. And so there was no consensus, and so they couldn't actually move any reforms of the cattle market. Wow. And so when you look at, and this is despite clear evidence, insider witnesses at these firms saying we are fixing prices with each other. So if you want to understand kind of the root cause of why our society is in chaos. Because it's not just that in beef packing, it's like that in kind of markets everywhere. I cover a lot of big tech, but I've also looked at things like medical supplies. I've looked at things like cheerleading. There's a monopoly in cheerleading. And it's all because these economists are saying, everything is fine. So that's really the key, is understanding that the economists, the sort of people that control the way our policymakers think, they are the ones saying, oh, you're too stupid to understand that, that market power isn't a thing. It's all just supply and demand. And so this was a great example of that, where they it's just totally crazy. And I expose that in this newsletter.
Yeah.
So why are they of the view that everything is fine? Do they have something to gain from saying everything is fine? Or are they just asking the question about the wrong group of people? Like, maybe these people over here who are already tremendously rich are fine, but how about everybody else feeling the effects downstream?
It's a great question. And, so there's a lot of ag universities that have new refurbished facilities with the name of, Tyson's and Cargill on there. And it all looks great when you go to these universities. And so these universities are often funded by, the big four. But it's hard to tell whether it's, a kind of a pay-to-play arrangement or whether it's just a religion. This is the thing about these kind of neoclassical economists. They really believe in what they're doing. Now, in this particular case, the economist who did this study that was effective, he said it cost $16 billion over 10 years if you made reforms to the market.
Sure.
He just manipulated the data, just straight up.
Wow.
And just took 15-year-old data that was not relevant and said, well, if you extrapolate this data forward, everything looks fine, because everything was fine in 2003. Which is crazy, because it's not 2003. The market is more consolidated. And then he even put in the paper, oh, and caveat, this stuff probably doesn't apply today. But the point, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But the point of the paper was to say, well, $16 billion over 10 years, and nobody was thinking about the caveats and the footnotes. It was just to give that talking point to the meat industry. Or the beef packing industry.
Right.
So it's just, this is what they do. They screwed up in the Google case in 2012. The economists are the reason we didn't bring a case against Google for monopolization. And the reason is because the economists said, oh, Google's not a monopoly. Also, in the changeover to mobile, nobody will ever really search for stuff on their phone. It's not like this is complicated stuff. This isn't like, oh, they make out the math a little wrong. This is blatantly stupid, either kind of rigged neoclassical ideas that are crazy. And these are the people who, they're at the Congressional Budget Office, so they control all the legislative scoring. They're at the Federal Reserve, so they control monetary policy. They are in the antitrust agencies. They are at the, in the agricultural agencies. They're in states. This is kind of the infestation of our thinking around political economy questions. And they intimidate policymakers, and they intimidate us into giving away our liberty.
This is really important. And sorry, A&M, where both my parents work. Strong connection, but looks like you're bought and paid for by the ag industry. Sorry to say that. It's literally in the name, agricultural mechanical. But I think the point that you're making is very important. We see this on our show all the time. We cover reality, as in people know the price is going up at the grocery store, and they're like, what is going on? They see that they used to have, some sort of optionality, and now that just disappears. Let's talk about that disconnect from this world of economists, because I think that's really important. These economists want you to literally not believe your own eyes. They want you to say, oh, your eyes are showing you that meat prices are actually rising, and you're crazy for even asking questions about that. And then that leads to all sorts of distortions in our politics, and actually a lot of cynical politicians who might say, oh, well, the reason why is, monetary policy or something, when it really has to do with something else. How exactly did this mindset kind of take over the government, take over all of our policy? Because what you're pointing to is that it's an outside philosophy, which has just become ingrained in the government. It wasn't always like this.
Yeah, no, that's right. This is a post kind of 1980 model of thinking about political economy, and it happened because of two movements. One on the right, which is the law and economics movement, which said we need to think about regulatory policy, and economics is a science. And so we need to think about regulatory policy and antitrust law and all these ways that we control the stuff that, how we make and move stuff. We have to do that according to these scientists. And that's why you saw a lot of innovation. That's when the Congressional Budget Office was created in the 70s, and the Fed became independent, and all these different, antitrust. So the right wing developed these tools at the University of Chicago. It's a narrow group. But then on the left, you saw the consumer rights movement. And it was a kind of quasi-socialist group that believed in kind of, well, we also believe that economics is a science. And we think that the most important thing, in fact, the only thing that matters is the consumer, consumer sovereignty. So how you do business is not important as long as you have well-regulated products and low prices to consumers. So this philosophy, and the right wing was like, absolutely, we'll take that. We love it. And so it's the elevation of the consumer above the citizen. So now, when all you see is the consumer, then it doesn't matter how anything is produced. It doesn't matter if it's made in China. It doesn't matter if it's made by one company. And so, we have this, like, I know you guys talk about the just-in-time manufacturing system and the consolidation of economic power. All of that happened because our philosophy said power doesn't matter. How we make things doesn't matter. Whether our rights as citizens don't matter. What matters is, are you getting cheap stuff as a consumer? Doesn't matter if the main street's getting ripped out. Doesn't matter if your union's getting busted or the farmers are going bankrupt. As long as the stuff is coming to you cheap, then it's fine. And now all of a sudden, the COVID hits, and the just-in-time manufacturing system, this perfect system, this highly efficient, globalized system goes haywire. And these economists who are dogmatic, this is their religion, they have nothing to say. They have no ideas. They have nothing to offer. They didn't see it coming, and they don't know how to get out of it.
Yeah.
That phrase, the elevation of the consumer over the citizen, I think is extraordinarily profound. Because if you think about, the Walmart is like the classic example, right? Walmart moves into town, Main Street is shuttered, the local wealth creation where it gets reinvested in the community, that all shuts down. Now it's all just being funneled down to Arkansas or, whatever your corporate conglomerate headquarters is. If it's not Walmart, wages are depressed, the unions are busted. So as a citizen, you have lost so much, but what's being offered in return is, yeah, but the prices are cheap. Like, what are you complaining about? Prices are cheap at Walmart, and that's good for working class people because you don't make that much money. So now you're making even less money, but the prices are the only thing that you're ultimately supposed to care about. I think that is incredibly profound, this idea of elevating the consumer over the citizen. So let's dig into a little bit more of what you're saying there with regards to the just-in-time inventory systems and how we're seeing this combination of supply chains breaking down, causing spikes in almost like random places in the economy. You've got rental cars are super expensive, and bacon, because of some, in part, animal welfare, but also the meat packing plants is expensive, and all these different items have suddenly either become scarce or extraordinarily expensive. When you look at these things that are happening, what do you have to say about it?
Well, I've been doing a series called Shortage Watch, and I actually looked at, I predicted shortages in Wired.
Yeah. I was inspired by your, I did a monologue inspired by your work. Yeah.
Stop it. I wrote about shortages in 2010, or potential shortages, because we've seen them off and on. When there was an earthquake in Fukushima, that caused a bunch of shortages of random things like videotapes. And so it's not too hard to see when you're like, oh, just-in-time manufacturing, oh, pandemic shutting down a lot of stuff, we're going to have problems, right? So I started writing about that. And but one of the things that you see is you're always going to have problems when you have a massive shift in demand, like we saw with COVID, and supply stuff shuts down. But monopolies make the problem so much worse. They amplify it. And it's because it's a very simple reason. Monopolies are artificial bottlenecks, right? A monopoly is a bottleneck. And when you build a society and your policy framework around creating monopolies, which we have done but in specific ways, by changing all sorts of rules around pricing and what firms can do and can't do, so everybody now invests to get a monopoly. When you create a society with a bunch of monopolies, then something like COVID becomes an opportunity to price gouge, to slow things down. Instead of, we need to compete to grab market share by making things, by dealing with the supply chain. So just a simple example. So when you make vaccines, right, this is a piece that I did. When you make vaccines, one of the things you need fancy plastic bags. They're called, they're in the biopharmaceutical industry, but they're basically fancy plastic bags. And we don't have enough of them. Now you would think, okay, well, we don't have enough, to mix the chemicals and stuff. We don't have enough because we need a lot of them because we need to make this vaccine, and that's very important. But in fact, it's not so much that we don't have enough of these plastic bags, it's that the plastic bags are not interoperable with most of the mixing machines. Why? Because there's been consolidation in the last 15 years.
Right.
So it's like the Keurig coffee machine, right? If you don't have enough coffee pods. It's not that you don't have the coffee, it's that they have imposed an interoperability regime where you actually just can't use other coffee pods to hook it up. So, it used to be that you could use different bags for different machines, and now you can't. So there is an artificial bottleneck. I mean, not to mention there's 2,800 patents on these bags and whatnot.
Right.
But it's like
Not to mention the vaccines themselves that exist.
Exactly. But I mean, so if you go throughout the economy, you can see this with railroads. They don't want to interchange with different railroads. You see this, with the ports, but you see it across the economy. This kind of the attempt to kind of consolidate and control means that there's a lot less flexibility. And so things can't adjust as quickly, which is why we're seeing a bunch of shortages.
So explain this in the context of where we are right now. So not only within the shortages, but also in terms of, there's a lot of people will blame the LA Ports Union, right? Or they'll blame, they're like, oh, it's just consumer demand is out of control. It's just a system we never could have anticipated. Why do monopolies make that worse? How are people seeing and feeling this in terms of their daily lives?
Well, I think so. A very clear example. I mean, just to get back to beef, there were actually shortages, right? Because one of the things that happened when when these industries consolidated is they shut down about 200 packing plants from the late 1970s until 2014, right? So the packing plants were bigger and could slaughter more cattle. Not actually as much. We did lose capacity, but we shut down a lot of plants. And so when plants went offline, like there was a fire in Kansas in 2019, there was that cyber attack. All of a sudden, prices spike and cattle ranchers go to, they bring their cattle and you can't sell it because the plant is down, right? And there isn't another plant. When you're bringing cattle to sell it, you have about a 3-week window.
Wow.
Right? And if it takes longer than 3 weeks, it's not economical to sell that cattle. You have to keep feeding it. There are other problems involved there. So the lack of resiliency actually caused a shortage. Now, the other thing that's happening with these meatpacking plants, and this is not just true of beef, it's also true across the board, they're not just fixing prices on products. Like, it's not just they're raising prices on tuna or chicken or beef, which is, there has been price fixing in all those. They're also wage fixing, right? So they're colluding to keep wages down. And when you treat workers like crap, and I know this is something that you guys have talked about, when you do it systematically for a long time, they don't want to come back to work. Right? Because it's not just totally weird, right?
Yeah.
It's not just that the wages are bad. It's that the safety standards are bad. It's that they're given things they can't do. If they get frustrated and angry, I often, in Big, I often write about, I use Office Space, right? The Bobs, those consultants, as the analogy for pretty much everything, because that's who runs American society these days. It's McKinsey. That's who everybody is responding to. And when you have market power over workers, right, then those are the guys you have to listen to because you can't quit your job and find another one. And so that's like one of the reasons we're seeing all of these labor shortages. They're like, I've had it. And the market power is really key to that. It's not the only thing that's going on, but it's really a key part of it.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I wanted to talk to you too about this news that we just got about Amazon. I mean, we already had strong suspicions that they were doing this, but some new reporting has revealed effectively what they've been doing is they've been taking data from products that are being sold on their website. They're saying, oh, this product is really popular.
Right.
Why don't we make our own version? We'll just clone it. We'll give our version precedence, so it'll get more favorable treatment in the Amazon algorithm, and we'll make a bunch of money that way, which is, blatantly, first of all, it's not what Jeff Bezos and other executives told Congress. It appears that they directly lied to Congress about this. But this is incredibly this is monopoly behavior, it's anti-competitive. Talk to us about where this comes from, what it means, and why people should care.
Yeah, it's a great point. So this is a violation of business privacy, right? So it's the equivalent of somebody going and taking your subscriber list, your viewer list, to contextualize it to you guys, or any business out there, just taking their data and then effectively using that. So all of your design data, knowing what works and what doesn't, and then marketing to those people with the same product. In some cases, they will rig search engines. So when you go onto Amazon, you look for something, you can put in the product name, but they'll show you the Amazon Basics version of it. That's what they're doing. It's clearly anti-competitive. It is a violation of business privacy, right? We talk a lot about privacy, but we don't talk about what, the actual privacy of individual businesses, which is what these big tech firms are doing. They don't take your data as consumers because they care about you. They take your data because they care about your commercial relationships with the competitors they're stealing money from. That's what is going on here. Now, Nate Sutton, who is an Amazon lobbyist, one of the only Amazon lobbyist, they don't have an army, it's just one guy. He lied to Congress. He said, we don't do that.
Right.
And then they found out
and
that
Bezos was like, I can't recall.
Yeah, I can't recall.
Yeah,
I don't.
Oh,
who knows?
Right. That's what he said. Yeah.
Who knows if we do this or not? Which is actually, it's probably worse if he was telling the truth because he's not really in charge of his company. It's too big to manage. But again, Bezos was like, we'll look into that, and this is absolutely not policy. And now it turns out they do it. It probably is policy. And a group of members on the right and the left. So this is Congressman Ken Buck, who's a Republican. I know you guys have talked to him, and David Cicilline on the Democratic side.
Had them both on the show.
In the antitrust subcommittee, they both sent a letter to Amazon saying, hey, we're thinking of sending a criminal referral for perjury, which, is amazing. And that is fundamentally what is exciting about the anti-monopoly movement is that, a lot of the things that are going on in our economy are just illegal, but we haven't been enforcing the law. And now you're seeing members of Congress saying, hey, this law thing should maybe apply to the powerful. This is the first time we're starting to see members of Congress saying, maybe we should put the richest guy in the world on legal notice that his freedom is at risk because of the crimes that he may have committed. I think actually he's the second richest now because of Elon Musk.
Right.
But give me a little grace here.
Right. It's whenever I think about resiliency, this is the point that I want people to try and take home. And especially, let's take it even back to meat. We'll stick on that. Why would it be a bad thing to have, a monopoly on meat in a time of crisis, and also a government and I think the problem is, maybe you can speak to this too, how do the regulators become enmeshed with the industry themselves? Because I was shocked when we spoke previously to a cattle rancher around the fact that you can label, American beef, even if it's from like Uruguay or Paraguay. And it's because they rigged the regulations and the regulators in order to have that, and it screws over domestic capacity. And maybe in a time of international crisis, like you might want to have a sustainable meat supply. How does that happen? In terms of the regulators themselves getting bought off, there was a lot of organic interest. Krystal and I were watching the LuLaRoe documentary on Amazon and multi-level marketing, and about how these people became deeply enmeshed with the FTC. So talk about that element, because I think that's so important too for people to understand how this allows to proliferate.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it comes back to our dependence on economists. And I'm not kidding. So Stephen Kuntz also wrote, there's a proposal called MCOOL, or mandatory country of origin labeling for meat. And Kuntz attacked that and said there's no evidence that this has any impact on anything. And besides, you can voluntarily label your meat already, right? But the point is that people want to buy American beef. And if you can put, product of USA on, beef that's coming in from Mexico or Uruguay or whatever else, that's fraud.
Yeah.
Right? It's a form of fraud. I mean, it's that as long as it's processed here, then you can put product of USA on it. And he said, well, there's no evidence. And besides, so it's like The Economist, and this guy's been doing it for 40 years. He probably relied on data that he did when he was in his 20s, because he hasn't learned anything new. And so the regulators look at this and they're very intimidated, because if the experts tell you, if the scientists tell you that there's no data on this or it will be really harmful, then, you don't want to be the guy who's going to cause problems or be blamed for problems. You saw what happened with Afghanistan, for example. When you do the right thing and the elites, the establishment doesn't like it, even though people might agree with the policy, they'll say, well, you really screwed it up. And that's the same thing that you see here. But to bring it back to, I talked about beef prices. The other thing to recognize is that cattle ranchers are family businesses, right? A lot of these are second, third, fourth generation. And, they're really important to our culture. And we've seen the chicken industry get destroyed. It's now totally vertically integrated. If you raise chicken, you are working for Tyson's. That's not yet the case with beef. It's the case with pigs. It's the case with poultry. It's not yet the case with beef. So these monopolists are changing American culture. In terms of the regulators, the Biden administration, to their credit, and this is Lena Khan at the Federal Trade Commission, has said we are changing the definition of how we do made in USA. We are going to say that if the steer has to be raised here to be called product of USA, and the Department of Agriculture, which also shares jurisdiction over meat labeling, is probably going to do that soon as well. And so this is something that the packers are very upset about. It's a success of the anti-monopoly movement. It's something that the cattle ranchers have been pushing for. We'll see how aggressive the enforcement is. But this stuff isn't impossible. And I'll tell you the reason that Lena Khan actually was able to push this is because she understands that economists are not sorcerers. They are often wrong. And that you actually have to talk to ordinary workers and ordinary business people and listen to what they're saying about the markets they're in. And that's how you should make policy.
That's right.
You had a good, on your note of disrespecting economists, which I'm all for. We can throw this tweet from Matt up on the screen, which is pretty funny, where you have this dude who's like, with all just due respect, Your Holiness, because the Pope had called out food monopolists. I've worked on food prices extensively for over a decade, and that is a misguided take, to which you respond, I still can't get over how the Pope said that food monopolists should not starve people, and an ag economist responded by saying the Pope does not understand economics. Incredible application there. Matt, how is the Biden administration doing so far on these issues? You mentioned it looks like they're moving a rule on Made in the USA and beef. Obviously, they announced with great fanfare a sort of renewed focus on antitrust. They've put some genuinely good people into key positions. Where do we stand right now?
So it is a moment of transition. You have Jonathan Cantor, who was just put up. I know you guys have mentioned him. He will probably get confirmed relatively soon, probably with bipartisan majority like Lena Khan. You have bitter fights at the FTC because the two Republicans there, Noah Phillips and Christine Wilson, are still ardent libertarians and are hostile. They even voted against bringing the Facebook antitrust suit under Trump. So that they vote against Made in USA. So they're supported by a lot of Republicans in the House, led by Jim Jordan. And I don't mean to pick on Republicans. There are plenty of Democrats. So Lofgren, California, is leading the Democrats on that one too. But the Biden administration, I would say that they are doing the right things, but they are slow and they are behind, right? So as an example, he did an executive order, which we've talked about, saying the whole of government needs to do a lot of stuff on monopolies, right? And the HHS, which is the department that's supposed to deal with health and human services, they were supposed to come out with a report saying, here are all the things we can do on hospital prices and drug prices and medical device prices, which is just, it's so corrupt and consolidated there. And their report said, they did come out with that report, and they didn't really offer any recommendations except Congress should do a bunch of stuff, which is crazy because we know Congress isn't going to do anything. And there's plenty of stuff levers they could pull on the executive branch to do that. And you saw something similar with Department of Transportation. You're seeing a whole bunch of kind of similarities across the government, except for, Lena Khan and Jonathan Cantor and Gary Gensler at the Securities and Exchange Commission. There are very few people, and there's some people at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, but there are very few people aside from that actually want to wield power and structure markets. Most people in the government, and these are bureaucrats in the government. This is why I'm not sort of totally into the pay-to-play causal model, because there are like bureaucrats who've been there for 25 years and are not looking to get paid. They're just doing the wrong thing.
Where it's just ideological.
Yeah.
It's just ideological. You see that across the government. People don't want to take on dominant market power because it's not what they've ever done. And so, only in a few bureaucracies where you have people that are like, I'm going to kick some ass, I'm going to force staff to do these things, and I have the support of the executive and some support in Congress, do you see that happening? So it's like, it's sort of the right thing, but it's not nearly enough. And then a lot of places they're kind of not not really doing anything.
It's such an important point. And I think that's why, personnel matters so much in terms of like who you put into place and all of that. What are some of the more hopeful things on the horizon, Matt, that you see in this move? Because it's often a story of losing to billionaires and to a lot of power. But there's some inklings of good things that are happening.
Oh, extraordinary stuff. I mean, part of the problem that I think I have is I think all of us is we don't focus on the good things that are happening. And I don't mean to say that, we should be optimistic.
Yeah.
What I mean is in the last 2 years, so since I started my newsletter, we've had 5 antitrust cases filed against Google from government enforcers.
Right.
2 antitrust cases filed against Facebook. 1 antitrust case filed against Amazon. Investigations of Apple. Those are the most powerful firms in the economy, right? And you have government enforcers saying, we want to break you up, or we want to stop your anti-competitive practices. That is extraordinary. I mean, truly extraordinary. And you're seeing action in Congress, in the Senate, in the House, lots of different bills, lots of conversation. I know we can be dismissive of Congress, but there is a genuine bipartisan conversation about what to do about these concentrations of power. You are seeing action in, as I mentioned, meatpacking. The ranchers are starting to say, yeah, we want action. And then I'm noticing things like, the worker rebellion that you guys talk about.
Yep.
So I'm going to write a piece on an organizer who's at one of these chain pharmacies, and she's saying, she started a campaign called "Pizza is Not Enough," which says, stop just bringing us pizza, right? Make our working conditions safe, because that's what the managers do, is they bring them pizza, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's all McKinsey, right? That's what you get.
Right.
And she was talking about, when I talked to her about some of the monopolistic practices that are going on, and she said, absolutely. And she was also saying, we don't have these problems at independent pharmacists, right? And the independent pharmacists are getting suppressed by the monopolies. So this is a worker saying, we need better policy from the executives at Walgreens and CVS and Walmart, but we also need to protect the independent pharmacists. And that is the political coalition that existed prior to the 1980s that was dominant. And it was sometimes in the Republican Party, sometimes the Democratic Party. If you go back over the last 200 years, it's small business people and workers, people who work for a living, versus the monopolist and the financier. And that broke in the 70s. So it became the consumer, maybe the worker sometimes with labor, versus all of business. But of course, a private equity firm or a monopolist is business, I guess, but they're not an independent pharmacist or a cattle rancher or an independent bookstore or whatever. It's like there are people who work for a living, and there are people who, use spreadsheets to do all sorts of harm. And traditionally, we've always distinguished between those. The reason we're in such trouble is because we stopped making that distinction in our politics after the 1970s. Excellent. And that's what we're coming back to. And that's so exciting. So we are going to win this. And it's like, that's why I write about it. That's why I spend my time on this, because it is sort of the skeleton key to justice in America. And I think worldwide, but I stick to.
Yeah, we'll stick to the U.S. first. All right.
And that's exactly why you guys should check out Matt's Substack. Congratulations on the big moves. You see what I did there?
Congrats, man.
Yeah, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Appreciate you, Matt.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Our pleasure.
See you guys later.